So good morning, everyone. Really? Really? Can we try it again? Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Totally awesome. So I had a really super long and intense presentation title. So accept my apologies, but after getting off the phone with Brett, we're like, but we got to talk about this, and then we have to talk about that. And then the other presenters, who were just amazing, talked about some things that I was going to cover, so I made some changes. And not because it's redundant, but mostly because the culture of this summit is just perfect. Everything that was discussed has already really said a lot of what I wanted to say. Can you just give me a round of applause for those of you who think that this has been an awesome summit? Right? So I want to talk about a pink elephant. Not my wheelchair, but then again, my wheelchair, right? Raise your hand if you've just kind of sort of been wondering, why does she roll? Anybody? Anybody curious? I've gotten some looks. I've gotten a couple people asking, and I was like, well, if I tell you now, my presentation will suck. So I'm going to tell you now, but I'm going to tell you through a third-party medium, and then we're going to talk about just a little bit more detail. Is that cool with everybody? All right. So let's make it happen.
You guys' first time?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
No mountain or rock climbing wall is too high for Yvette Pegues.
I should hope so.
She's ready to tackle just about anything, despite what some could view as a limitation.
Life was supposedly great until it wasn't.
To understand, you have to go back several years to her diagnosis of Arnold-Chiari malformation.
My brainstem was too long at birth, but at this point, the paralysis was caused by my brain actually falling into my spinal cord.
That meant surgery, a procedure that would forever change her life.
As a result of that operation, I walked in and never walked back out.
Adjusting to her new normal was agonizing.
Don't know if I was feeling sorry for myself. I knew I was in a lot of pain. But then my then 7-year-old son asked his teacher, was his mommy gonna die? And I said, okay, I gotta get up.
And that's what she's done ever since, rise above life's hurdles.
Oh, God.
She's written a book, competed in and won several wheelchair pageants, and started an organization to help connect people with disabilities with resources. Which brings us back to today. Yvette's now saying yes to even more, adaptive sports.
I am so ready!
Using special tools and a pulling method, Yvette went rock climbing at Stone Summit in Atlanta, thanks to the help of Catalyst Sports, a nonprofit organization.
Don't look down.
She even challenged me to climb. And how could I not? She's not the kind of person you can say no to. Yvette and others with various disabilities, some of them invisible to the eye, are meeting and mastering new challenges and goals. Mark Huckabee, or Coach Huck as he's called, volunteers with the group.
Our primary goal is to invite these individuals, inspire them to do these activities, challenge them in new ways.
Nicola Say isn't a stranger to rock climbing. She's done it now for years, even before an accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. But that doesn't stop her from racing to the top.
She's gonna get higher than I did.
For her, it's all about inclusion, inviting people in.
We are humans. We are able to do everything you guys can do, maybe a little bit differently or a little adjusted, but we love to do the same things you guys do.
Because people with disabilities like to have a good time too. So whether it's taking on a skateboard park or new adventures on the water, count on Yvette to sign up, leading the way for others learning to look beyond the limits placed on them by life or society.
As far as I'm concerned, there's really nothing that stops me, really, honestly. If it's adaptive and my husband gives me his blessing and he doesn't mind a few more gray hairs, I just do it.
It's that same attitude she hopes to inspire in others.
I say life doesn't end at the point of the injury, and that you can live forward after a life-changing event.
Jennifer Bellamy, 11 Alive News.
So I I usually say something similar. I thought she kind of said it better, but yes, my brain did fall into my spinal cord 6 years ago, and I never walked back out of surgery. I went in to fix my brain, and I had a spinal seizure. So my life obviously changed. So because Brett and I wanted to infuse a little bit of my personal story into what I'm going to talk about today, we're going to talk about goals, right? Goals for the presentation. Then we're going to talk about gold, which is just some examples of what that means that you can take with you, and then the girl, right? So I'm going to try to infuse a little bit of my story as we go through, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. But yes, I have 2 boys, so I have to stay competitive. So you'll see kind of what I do to make sure that these boys know that, you know, I'm still boss, right? So, right. Session goals. As I said, we started out with a lot of long stuff. You don't have to read it again, but for the most part, the top 3 things we're going to talk about today is humanity, social responsibility, and project solutions. So I'm going to move forward and also make sure you know that I promised to talk about those 3 items in a little bit more detail, right? We're going to talk about problems versus people, strategic advocacy, leverage, which I know each of you understand, and full disclosure, which is a little gray, but I'll clear that up for you. What is digital project management? I was a technical project manager at IBM. I believe it's the same thing. It's what I do now personally, but I came in as an engineer, so to move to project management was not something I was expecting. I loved touching the machines, but I realized that I always had a team to do it professionally, get my PMI certification, and then go on to be a program manager where I was actually supporting and supervising other project managers, gave me a kind of 5,000-foot view of who I was before I became the program manager. But when we look at DPM, the biggest piece of it is the user experience. Who's the user? Obviously the end user, you have your stakeholders, but how about the people you're working with? Rachel talked about something yesterday that I'll bring up again today, but it just blew my mind because I felt like it's something we should all chant. But I'll talk more about that because humanity, when I think about humanity, the human part of humanity should be what we focus on, right? We're all human beings. And so often, like Nicolas Say mentioned in the video, we're people, right? We're human. But believe it or not, depending on your outward or your invisible disability, that pretty much talks about disabilities you can't see, which includes cancer, which includes diabetes, which includes mental illness, and so many things that you can't see are just as important as things you can see. But more importantly, the human part of each and every one of us shouldn't require that we be treated differently, but just that we be treated human, right? So the people versus the problem. I always say be hard on the problem, but easy on the people. But how often do we get the 2 mixed up, right? The problem's hard, so we were really hard on the people with the problems. Now that kind of goes across the board. We're talking about projects and we're talking about people, but more importantly, recognize that they're separate and that you can treat them different. And as a project manager, you do have full control over the culture of your project. It doesn't sound like it, but if you look at it at the end of the day, the culture is going to look like exactly what you prepared that culture to be. Is that hard to do when you're managing people? Absolutely. But are you managing people or processes? So be easy on the people and hard on the processes because the people need to make the processes work, right? So digital inclusion, when you think of digital inclusion, you wonder, well, what does that actually mean? Well, nothing about us without us is most of what it means, right? So when Rachel talked about that yesterday, I was in the corner of the room jumping up and down because I'm not just an advocate, you know, I'm also an activist. Yeah, like I mean it, right? So I've been in parades, I've been in government offices for the very same reason I'm sitting up here today to talk about inclusion and to talk about difference and diversity. A lot of companies are out there saying, we want to be diverse. We recognize difference, but the culture isn't cultivated. So in the case where I am in these parades and we're marching and we're talking about our rights, human rights, we actually chant nothing about us without us because believe it or not, prior to my injury, I don't think I really knew much about disability. So I'm going to stop for a moment here and you're welcome not to participate if you're not comfortable, but can I get a show of hands for those of you in the audience who know someone in your direct family, right? That would be a mom, a dad, sister, brother, grandparent with a disability. If you just raise your hands. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Okay, so how many of you actually work with someone who has disclosed about either an invisible or a visible disability? Raise your hands. Wow, that is awesome. Okay, like maybe you should raise your hand if you don't know anyone with a disability and you don't work with anyone with a disability and you were just as in the dark as I was 5 years ago. Raise your hands. Wow. Like I can count on 2 hands. That's impressive. Okay, so digital inclusion is possible, right? There are laws that require that your website is accessible, right? We have ramps, we have elevators, we have those things that are required by law. But it is our responsibility to go above and beyond the law. So I'm going to do an exercise with everyone. Again, if you're able, please stand up for me. Move your shoulders around, kind of get up. Okay, all right. Beautiful people. Okay, now you can sit down. I always get that reaction. I love it. All right, you can stand up again. You good? All right. Beautiful people. All right, you can sit down now. Now, I've done this exercise before, and like I said, I get some laughter. But the reason I do that is for the very reason that we have the 2 slides up on the screen right now. The difference between empathy and sympathy. I can't stand up. And as simple as that seemed, right? It was a little funny. We did it a couple times to kind of bring home the fact that you have an ability that a small number of individuals may or may not have. How do you know that? In my case, my physical disability is pretty obvious. And in some cases, that works to my benefit. It's pretty obvious when I roll into a room that no one's going to point me to the stairs. It's happened. The question I get most is, how do you walk in those heels? I give them a minute. And if a minute's not enough, I just say, I don't walk. But, and I have to follow with a but, because this one time I did it, the woman stared at me, and what seemed like 100 minutes, she just didn't move. She was paralyzed looking at me, and I said, it's okay, I'm okay, and you can breathe now. But in that moment, I always have to say, these heels are my silver lining. I'd never wear these heels if I had to walk in them. Dude, ladies, raise your hands if we have sitting shoes and standing shoes. Okay, I just get to wear my sitting shoes all the time, right? So empathy is more about what? Sensitive to the kinds of nonverbal clues, like me rolling into a room. That's pretty obvious, right? You don't have to run up and say, oh my God, I'm so sorry you're in a wheelchair. It won't change anything, right? But sympathy is, hey, I lost a family member. And then you just provide comfort or opportunity. I think when I roll into a room, there's a big confusion about which one needs to be used. And the reason why I'm bringing this up around all these amazing professionals and great faces looking back at me is because I don't want an award for showing up. I know that sounds crazy, but so many people come to me and say, well, I've never seen anyone in a wheelchair with heels on. Oh my God, your hair's combed. Oh my gosh, you have on makeup. Go you. And the reason why that doesn't work for me is because it doesn't have to. I want to be seen for what I can add to your project. And that's okay. It sounds simple, but you would be surprised. So empathy would be, is there something I need to know to make our time together easier for you? I don't have to be in a wheelchair for you to ask that question. You can ask your stakeholders that same question, because disability is on both sides of the terminal. Yes? So I tried to put a little bit of my story in here, we're looking at different project processes, right, and the project cycle. The first stage is initiation. When I initiated my personal project, which is my life, I'm an engineer at IBM. I'm doing great. I met my husband in, where did we meet? Oh my God, he's gonna kill me. We met in Las Vegas. I was in Miami. He was in Memphis. We met in Vegas. We moved to Atlanta. And then Harvard started calling. So I'm thinking, life's good, right? I've got this great husband, this great job. We're making 7 figures. We're moving, and we're going to get this PhD degree. And it wasn't even in anything technology. It really was in education. But the fact that they came calling on me and thought that I was worthy of this full scholarship made me pretty excited. We're going to come back to that and talk about social responsibility, right? Social responsibility is a very strategic way for companies to run these days, right? We talked about professional empathy. That means I'm not going to force you to tell me things you don't want to tell me, right? But professionally, you need to know that 4 out of 6 people have a disability. That means for every 6 people, 4 of them either have a silent, quiet, invisible disability or have a direct relationship with someone with a disability, right? We don't know your story. You don't have to tell your story. But trust and believe that everyone has a story. Digital inclusion should be the goal. So if you are writing a program, whether your stakeholder has a disability or has disclosed that a disability will be part of the user group, it still needs to be tested. You need to understand that what you do today is actually for a tomorrow solution. And as crazy as that sounds, your projects can run years or months, but at the end of the day, it's not the first project cycle that solution will have, right? So WCAG 2.0, anybody know what that is? Good, right? That's basic. It's the law. But how do you go beyond that, right? Because there's the letter of the law, and then there's the spirit of the law. So one just means you get to check boxes. The other one means you get to have an experience or provide an experience for someone that they weren't expecting. And that creates longevity in your project solution. Yes? People, profit, planet. When I try to describe for people what CSR, corporate social responsibility is, it's just that. But doesn't that also sound like your project responsibility, right? You manage people and resources, right? Profit, you want to make sure you don't go scope creep, right? You don't want to make sure you spend more money than you're given, and if you do, not by much. And then the planet. How is your solution providing an evergreen end result? Evergreen meaning that it will always be something that you can fall back on and know that you've made a difference. Now, the problem with project management is we don't always see the implementation of our solution. How many people have the benefit, the pleasure of knowing exactly what happens after they drop their project? That's not bad. That's not bad. Okay. We talk about people, profit, and planet, right? So the people means the quality of that relationship, the quality of that connection, whether it's personal or professional, right? Then we talk about the mobility of it. How are we going to take the profit? How are we going to take that particular project and make money? Really, at the end of the day, that's what we're doing, right? We're creating something for sustainability, yes? And then the environment. Not everyone is working in a green space, so you may not personally feel like what you're doing is affecting the environment, but when we talk about your personal power, and we're talking about culture, it does. So the next phase of my personal project plan was actually everything going well until it didn't. So I had an injury that was genetic. I was actually born with it. And after my diagnosis, I was told, you probably should have been born in a wheelchair. So I had the opportunity to come quarter life and then experience this incredible change. Sometimes it sounds fair, sometimes it doesn't. I didn't have as much time, plus I had 2 kids. I had to adjust and adapt. But I went in to fix my brain and came out with a spinal cord injury. So then that kind of made things a little heavier, right? I was medically mute for 8 months, and I promised God that if he let me talk again, that I'd never stop talking again. And I haven't, right? So we actually went from making 6 to 7 figures to owing 6 to 7 figures overnight. That was a huge adjustment. Being disabled is expensive, right? Anything you put disability or accessibility on the price tag goes up 400%, easily. So that's the me in my planning phase. So as I'm planning my personal life, my personal project plan, things kind of got in the way. That's why my motto is always adapting. Each of you should always adapt. But then I had leverage. Yes, that's me, surfing. I know when to take calculated risks. Each of us are taught how to take calculated risks. It's not easy, but it's necessary. And it's personal, because you're responsible for that project. But if you influence the direction of your project and you have the confidence of your stakeholders, management, and your executive team, they'll trust you. How do you build trust? The same way you build relationships, right? We talked about digital inclusion as a goal, but it's in every single step of the process, not just at the beginning, the middle, or the end, but it needs to be threaded through the entire project. We'll talk about some ways that you can do that. Disclosure, that's sticky, right? Disclosure on both sides of the terminal. Again, that question that I gave you, that you're welcome to use, I don't think it's patented yet, but how can I help you? Is there anything that I need to know that will help us to have a better project experience? You can say that to an individual. It works on my kids. It should work on anyone. So I'd like to talk about some of the things you may or may not know. If any of these things sound familiar to you, you're welcome to scream and holler. But necessity is the mother of invention, right? This is the gold. And some of the things that I think we take for granted, I know I did, came into play because there was a disability need. But it's not about doing something exclusive, it's about being inclusive. So think about it. Light switches. So I don't know if you have the rocker design light switch or just the actual pull it up, push it down kind of light switch, and then you have also the dimming feature. All those things were created because people with disabilities, maybe even Parkinson's or cerebral palsy, don't have the grip to touch some of those things, just like with a doorknob. It's easier to use a lever, right, instead of the actual knob that I now have to grip and turn. Sounds super simple, but it can make a huge difference in the life of someone with a disability and their family members. And think about a kid. It's easier for a kid to use a lever than an actual knob, in which case we have knobs at our house. So, toothbrushes, right? Who uses a power brush? Power toothbrush? Yeah. People with disabilities kind of are the impetus for those kind of technology, right? Sidewalks. Who knows why we have those bumps at the curb cut? Sometimes they're bright yellow. Okay, I see some hands up front. Okay, all right, not as many people as I thought. Who wants to tell me what they're for? For the sight impaired, right? And I'm glad you said blind because there is a person first type of language that I had to learn. I am coming into now this country called disability that I had no understanding of. So I couldn't say blind, I couldn't say deaf, right? I had to say sight impaired or hearing impaired. And as crazy as that sounds, that can affect the relationship you have with someone with a disability because they just assume you could care less. Whether or not you know, ignorance is not an excuse. So I had to, being in the community, learn an entirely new language. So think about person first, right? I'm not wheelchair bound, right? I'm not a wheelchair person. I'm a person in a wheelchair. That's what people first language means. I know this sounds deep, but I was kind of left out of parties because I didn't know how to speak to other people with disabilities, and it's sad because I was disabled, but it's a huge sensitivity area. So thank you for using that. Kitchen tools, right? There are kitchen tools specifically created, and I don't know if you have the new can opener, but I'm telling you, there's so much creative technology that's going into it. We talked about utensils, automatic doors. The bathrooms have it now. How awesome is it that you can wash your hands and come out like a surgeon and never have to touch a knob, right? You just spent 10 minutes washing your hands, then you touch a dirty knob. But the power doors and being able to push out, the weight of the doors, all those simple things is what I do when I go into a building, and I have to see it anyway and make sure I cultivate that culture and say, have you considered? Yes? So having someone come in and do an assessment in your project, technical assessment, or a physical assessment of your common areas in a building, that is an inclusion process, an inclusion step that you can take, yes? So, touch and pinch. Who has the touch screen? Or when you don't have a touch screen, you kind of touch the screen anyway because you're used to a touch screen. Touch screen people, anybody? Thank you, right? So that's why the touch screen was created. Does it work for everybody? Yes. That's the whole purpose of inclusion. Inclusion is not for a specific group of people in the society. It's to help and support as many people as possible. There's no one solution for everyone, but that's what inclusion does. Full disclosure is something that is important, but there's also a gray area, and let me tell you why, right? As a corporate disability and diversity consultant, I am the person in between the projects, in between corporate, in between the employee and the employer, to have those very uncomfortable situations, those very uncomfortable conversations and situations that you have to decide, is this an Yvette thing? Is this a girl thing, or is this a disability thing? And it sounds crazy, but it's necessary. So when I come into the room, I say, what's the problem? They're like, well, I have this disability. How much should I tell? Full disclosure is only important as much as it relates to your job requirements. If I don't have to walk, literally, not to get from point A to point B, but if I don't physically need to take steps to get from one place to the other, do I have to tell them that I can't walk? Well, it's pretty obvious because I'm in a chair, but you know what I mean, right? So that's the question that I get a lot. A lot of people ask me, how much should I tell? Well, there are laws to protect you. If you have an invisible disability or a visible disability, you only have to tell as much as it relates to the job. So how then, as a project manager, do you prepare for inclusion and support on your project if you don't know? Guess what? You do it anyway, right? Work it into the first phase of your project. If you do not have someone consulting on your project to make sure that inclusion is included, then make sure you have that person available. And again, that person may have a disability. That person may be me. It may be a consultant. It may just be your client, the stakeholder, who has a relationship with the individual. I'm on several boards for people with disabilities because there's no one on the board with a disability. And as crazy as that sounds, if the solution is for someone or a group of people with disabilities, regardless of the disability, you should have someone on your project who understands it. For example, wheelchair bound. When I do interviews, I like to get the proof because the person writing it may use words that will offend my audience. So think about your projects and about who you need to have on there, right? Rachel said it best, right? Should you? No, you really shouldn't. Not if you don't have the right people on the team to help with the end user experience, yes? Stress testing, you can bring them in at that point as well. So we talked about IQ and EQ on some of the different presentations that were given earlier, but IQ is intellectual quotient. We know that, right? But then EQ is emotional quotient. I did not know anything about EQ until I lost my IQ, right? I'll never be recruited by Harvard again. Not because I'm smart anyway, right? So after my brain injury, the left part of my brain, my engineering brain, broke. So I could no longer continue to work in the field where I'd spent almost 10 years learning to be really good at. I never had to work really hard at school because it just came supernatural. To the point where I was a little guilty at times because I'm like, this stuff comes easy. But it doesn't. And the reason why that's important, and I need to bring that to your attention, is because if you look at the EQ side of the scale, right? Great work experience, I had a great degree, I pretty much felt like my talent would be enough until it wasn't. So what I realized then is instead of doing 20% of EQ and 80% IQ, instead of using more of my talents than my gifts, I had to switch it around. I had to use 80% now of my gifts. No brain injury, no medical mute, no invisible disability took away my gift. I promise you that before my brain injury, I didn't like people very much. Any techies feel me on that? It's not that I didn't like people. No. I understood computers, bits and bytes, black and white. It just made sense. It was tangible, right? I know we people manage, but it just really made a lot more sense to work with the computer, right? Then I had a child, and everything changed, right? I figured, program it, it'll do exactly what I tell it to do. It doesn't work, right? So what I learned, though, is with my EQ, yes, I lost IQ, but look what I gained, right? I tipped the scales in the area of self-awareness, right? I feel like I can walk into a room and connect with anyone. It's my superpower. I have this lived experience. So if I go into a C-suite meeting and they say, we don't really have enough money for inclusion, I can say, I get it. I've been there. We've got budgets. But guess what? $8 trillion is the amount of money that is sitting in the community called disability. It is an entire industry. And if you're marketing without including that people group, guess what? You will come up short. It's an $8 trillion industry. So everybody talks about, well, let's go to the teens and the tweens. We blow that out of the water, especially in the area of technology. So knowing those things, being able to say, I get it. I walked, I talked, I've done all the things you've done, and now I'm here and I can give you both experiences. Use me as your crash dummy, which I totally love, seriously. Creative destruction. Be willing to tear it down and start over. And I don't know if maybe my frontal cortex was lost in the brain injury, but I am so incredibly comfortable taking risks, tearing it down and starting over, rather than putting patches, bubble gum, rubber band, and glue on it. So I want to talk about my little people. I have to talk about my little people. And this isn't complete closure for me, but I had to find closure personally so that I wasn't trying to go back to be who I was. And the reason why I think that's important for each of you to hear is because obviously every project is different, and at the end of every project, you'll be someone else. If the project doesn't teach you something about someone or something else, something you didn't know before, then it doesn't really challenge you. But I believe that even though I lost a lot, I've gained a lot. And yes, I was in a pageant, which was so scary because now an engineer is being asked to be in a pageant. I was like, dude, no. Like, I'm not a girly girl. I don't wear pink, totally don't do crowns, and makeup, I don't even know how to put on makeup. And they're like, well, Yvette, you know, you're working with kids who have autism. Wouldn't you want to expand your gift beyond your zip code, yada, yada? And I said, no. Are you kidding? My IT friends would laugh me out of the building. I totally can't be in a pageant. I'd rather be smart than beautiful. And they said, your talent is your community service. The kids need you. So anyway, I did it. And so I won my state title as Miss Wheelchair Georgia, becoming the first Georgian to actually compete on the national level. Then I went over to a whole nother state and met these amazing and incredible women in wheelchairs who were so powerful in and of themselves within minutes. I didn't even know they were still in wheelchairs because they were smart, they were beautiful, and they had on makeup. Makeup. That was huge for me. And I embraced my girlhood. I put on the crown, and as you can see, my chair is pink. So thank you very much. I'm a girl now. My mother would be so proud. But the whole point I'm making is my life matters, right? Does anybody recognize a certain someone in my presentation? Like meeting him, the dog, you see the dog, right? The dog, that means something to me. Everything that happens in my life means something to me. And as a result of the most incredible and painful thing that ever happened to me, my boys wrote a book. They turned bullying into a book. So when people came to them and said, hey, what's wrong with your mom? Your mom has wheels. My mom has feet. What's wrong? Now they get to say, buy the book. It's my college fund. Our life is great. And so even out of the ashes that you pull your project, right? Because we do it often, not just in the first phase, but in every phase, there's going to be some burn. But there will be an amazing end to your project. Actually, do you really even want it to end? You want it to be evergreen. It doesn't even have to end. But the whole point is you have to find your silver lining in every single phase of the project. So the one on my left, your left? Yeah, your left, that's Elijah, he's 10. And Isaiah is 12. And when I realized I was born to be a project manager was in 2010 when I went to Haiti after the earthquake with this incredible medical team, right? There were plastic surgeons, there were nurses, doctors, because this was not just a mission trip, it was disaster recovery. I was stepping over dead bodies, and I was having to speak to individuals who came to me with pictures of lost family members. But on this trip, with all these medical professionals, I said, what can I do? I can barely put on a Band-Aid. My kids are little. What can I do in such a medically sensitive situation? And someone said, do you speak any other languages? I said, oh my gosh, yeah, I speak 5 languages. So that big old sticker on my chest has all the languages that I spoke, and I went into PM monster mode. I was like, okay, this goes here, and this goes here, and I'm calling the planes, and I think in that picture, I was just getting off of one of those aircrafts, and I was just all over the place, and I felt like in that moment, even though it had nothing to do with technology, that project managing isn't something that you do as a job, it's who you are. You take it everywhere with you. My kids have lists, right? So you take it into every situation that you're in. And that's when I knew that I'll always be a project manager. I have to look back at that picture because obviously I was walking, right? And I have to know that that still exists in my life and how important that still is to me. When I realized that I was made to be a mom, and as simple as that sounds, I didn't always think that. I always felt like, I'm a project manager, I'm not a mom. But you can be both. And we're talking about intersectionality here. How can you be both? How can you be more than one? Because I'm not just a woman. I'm not just a woman of color, but I'm a woman of color with a disability who understands inclusion and projects. And a whole bunch of other stuff, right? I'm an adaptive athlete. I love it. In fact, I think I do more now than I did before my injury. Again, the frontal cortex thing. But you have to come to a place where you realize, who am I really? And when can I be her? I'm always me. So now we're going to do a pouty face selfie challenge. So Priscilla is She's my virtual assistant, but she's here today, so, you know, she's not so virtual today. So Priscilla's going to come up, and I need each of you to stand up, right? And do you see our pouty faces? Use Elvis as your, right, as your guide, right? Practice your pouty face. Brett, there you go, right? We did the pouty face. I think we did good. You think we did good with the pouty face? All right, let me see your pouty faces. A little bit more, okay. You're smiling. You got a pouty face. All right, come on, we're going to do a selfie, everybody. Turn around. Turn around. Yep, hold it up. Pouty faces. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Pouty face. All right. We'll put that on Slack. Give yourselves a hand. Another exercise. Raise your hand if you have an Apple phone. iOS, Apple? Oh, man. I thought I'd have more. Raise your hands again. Oh, yeah. Okay. That's good. All right. Raise your hand if you're Android. Okay. All right. All right. You can stay. You can stay. But here's some of the things I want you to do. If you will just pull them out, pull out your phones. Like this is the one time during a presentation you can pull out your phones. Yeah? You got them? Yep. Hold them up when you got them. Android, you can hold yours up too. Yeah. All right. Got it. Some of you have your lights on. I feel like you should. Yeah. All right. So connect your hotspot. Make sure your hotspot is on. Everybody know how to do that? Yeah, you're connected? Cellular? Yeah? Okay, I see some heads. All right, what are we going to do next? Bluetooth? Everybody have your Bluetooth on? Bluetooth turned on? Can I get a yes? Yes, so woo. Good, all right. So AirDrop. You should all know how to AirDrop. I'm going to AirDrop you something. So turn it on. Make sure you have it set to everyone. So if I'm not in your phone book, and even if I am, set it to everyone. All right? Everybody ready? Scream if you're ready. All right, Priscilla, do you see everybody? All right, drop it. All right, for those of you who are Android users, you can take a picture of the screen. So while we're kind of playing around with technology right now, I'm airdropping you my e-card. Again, if you're on Android phone, you can take a picture of the screen. But what I'm hoping that will happen as we leave here is that, yes, you came here to learn a lot of technical skill sets. And I'm sure that was very well covered, and I probably could have done some of it too. But more importantly, I wanted to make sure that everyone in this room knew that we are here. We are all valuable. And we're valuable on your project. We're valuable as your stakeholder. We are your stakeholders. We are your end users. Yes? And I really feel like the technology that we create today really does complete our tomorrows. Because if you think about it, if you live long enough, you will experience a disability. I'm not trying to be a downer here, right? It could be temporary. But imagine, if you want to live until you're 80, we're healthier now. We're getting older than we've ever been. So our baby boomers are the reason why there's so much inclusion in other areas of the market, because they're aging and they have money and we want to keep them happy. But let's keep our stakeholders happy as well, right? There's injury, there's illness, there's accidents, and then there's aging. So if for no other reason, create inclusion opportunities for you later, right? It's like you're kind of setting it up for yourself another 50, 60, 70 years from now, yeah? Does that work? But you can be selfish about it, right? Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you.